behind their doors.
我想这是一个非常动态的一个行业历史上曾经的第一现在都不见了。对于华为来说的话，我们还是说我们一定要为客户创造价值，然后的话要有自己独特的竞争优势。加油！
If a Chinese firm can innovate, then China has a shot at joining the ranks of rich countries.
Could the next big brand that reshapes the landscape for global business be from China? To find out, I'm Linda Yu here in China, Silicon Valley, and we're talking business.
It's 7 a.m. and like billions of people, it's time to get up and go to work. For Lin Ye, it's to go to his dream job. The company that he and all of these people work for, you may have never heard of, for now. But for Chinese engineers, it's the place to be.
主要是有3个原因，第一个是因为华为是一个比较
There are 3 reasons I'm here, he tells me. They're a big multinational company, they're famous for their innovation in the telecoms industry, and all of my engineering classmates want to work here. In a short period of time, Huawei has become the world's largest telecoms company. How it did it could help answer the big question over China's own future. Can the nation innovate? That's, after all, the key to sustaining growth and becoming prosperous. But Huawei has a reputation for being media shy. We were, though, given unprecedented access, so I started off with a tour of their sprawling campus.
So the greenery around here, it's reminiscent of Silicon Valley. The people who work here don't work in tall high-rises full of glass cubicles. They work in an ecosystem. They have communal offices, they have shared canteens, there's even a culture of taking a nap after lunch. Quite unusual for a Chinese company, but Mr. Ren got this idea after he visited Silicon Valley.
It's hardly the stuff a front covers, but it requires being technologically advanced. And being an innovative company was the vision of its founder, Ren Zhenfei.
Across the lake there's the office of Mr. Ren, the founder of Huawei. He supposedly no longer runs the company, but he still has a presence on campus.
Now, it's up to one of 3 bosses to take a turn running the company. Every 6 months, a different CEO takes the helm. It's unusual, but Huawei hopes it's an innovative approach to promote teamwork at the very top. And, for the first time ever, the current CEO of Huawei, Guoping, has given a TV interview.
What is Huawei's competitive advantage?
华为所从事的是一个应该说是变化非常快的一个行业。我们从事是信息通信行业。那么这个行业的话呢，我认为的话呢，要建立起它的竞争优势的话，有2个方面。一方面的话呢是技术上的创新，第2个方面的话呢，要让技术可持续创新，还需要有管理上的创新。所以华为的话一直注重于这2个方面的创新。
But they started small in an old office building in Shenzhen, a short drive from Hong Kong.
So, this is where it all began. Modest beginnings. He got 5 investors together. They each pulled together 3,500 RMB and started a multi-billion-dollar company.
That was in 1987 when Mr. Ren, along with a few employees, started importing telecommunications equipment. Huawei quickly outgrew the space when it started to develop its own products. That was unusual compared with other Chinese companies that relied on foreign technology. Huawei innovated from the beginning, and they did so in an industry normally thought of as strategic and dominated by state-owned firms. Huawei took advantage of China's opening up when it set up in Shenzhen. To promote manufacturing and exports, China experimented with special economic zones that were more market-driven and open to trade. One of the first was Shenzhen in Guangdong province. It didn't start off high-tech and had been full of cheap factories. But that changed quickly as the open nature of the city attracted some of the most ambitious Chinese companies.
When you're in a high-tech zone, you're surrounded by competitors. But you could walk by, see one of their products and think, oh, I like that feature and I can do it even better. And that's how ideas spark more ideas.
Back on campus in their exhibition hall, Huawei is keen to show that they have been doing just that. They're making huge investments in research and development, consistently spending more than 10% of revenues. That puts them in the same league as the biggest spenders globally. They're racing to develop a 5G network where a movie can be downloaded in seconds. But initially, it wasn't big steps. Huawei innovated to make small improvements to address customer needs.
Hi, how are you? Are you in Shanghai?
Yeah, I'm in Shanghai. We're talking to Huawei.
Thank you very much. This is an example of how Huawei does innovation. It responds to the needs of its customers. So, a Chinese restaurant wanted a way for its customers in Shanghai to talk to its customers in Beijing so that families dining in different places could talk to each other and share a meal. And that's why Huawei developed a teleconferencing facility.
That's not how Western companies do it. They tend to focus on big inventions. But it's how latecomers like Chinese firms compete against established companies. Lots of Chinese companies bought technology or transferred technology, didn't innovate themselves. What made your company focus so much on innovation from the start?
我们的出发点是要满足客户的需求，那么从客户需求出发，这些技术有现成的技术的话，我们可能会沿用现有的技术。那么对那些客户的技术的话呢，它是需要改造、需要创新的话，需要跨学科去做的攻关的话呢，那么华为也是集中自己的力量，是全球各个研究所、各个机构的力量来实现客户的梦想。
But a Chinese dream may be harder to realize. Made in China is perceived as low quality, and Huawei is one of the first to try and change that view.
It's probably fair to say that the big world out there outside Asia do not really know much about China. China has been coming to the table over the last 10 or 15 years. China has opened up, it is still opening up. So most people globally don't really know much about China. When we don't know much about a country, we tend to be on the skeptical side. As much as we are curious, we may also be a little reserved. It reminds me very much when Samsung came up and some of the other Korean enterprises globalized. People had a very indifferent, tending to be almost negative perception on Korea, always just back to the early 90s. This is only 20, 25 years ago. So Huawei in itself cannot change it, but I think they need to overdo it. They need to make sure that the long-term strategy is really based on providing all the time the latest technology, the latest innovation, and be very, very open. Because they cannot answer all the questions about China, but they can answer some of the questions about what does a Chinese global enterprise truly bring to the table.
Many companies have already shown what they can do in the vast domestic market where Chinese firms undoubtedly dominate. But can they compete in a free global market?
This may look like NASA, but this is how Huawei keeps track of its systems worldwide.
And unlike most Chinese companies, Huawei was international from the beginning, selling low-cost telecoms equipment to emerging markets. Now, 1/3 of the world's population uses their products, and they are in 150 countries. To keep growing, they need to attract the best and the brightest. And in China, that certainly includes offering a good and subsidized lunch. A good work environment requires more than just a cheap lunch, of course. Huawei offers its employees the chance to buy stock in the company, making them all shareholders in a sense. Employee stock ownership plans aren't new, but it's unusual in China. Lin Ye and his friends sit down to what looks more like a banquet than lunch. He's been at Huawei for nearly 2 years, so soon he can buy shares. Will he?
我一定会买的，因为我还是比较
I certainly would, he tells me, because it affirms my role in the company and gives me a reason to work harder. As the number of employees grows and wants to cash out, there will be challenges in running this type of plan with thousands of owners. But for now, it's one of the inducements to work at Huawei. And Huawei goes to great lengths to entice talent.
华为的话呢，总是愿意这个找到最优秀的人、最有创造性的人来这个从事研发，这样的话呢，使得我们的创新总是有效果。我上个月在爱尔兰见了爱尔兰的总理，我跟他说我们在爱尔兰的克克那个地方有一个小型的研究所，他觉得很奇怪，哎，你怎么跑到克克？他离我都柏林还有几百公里呢？我说，因为那里有一个很优秀的架构设计师，他愿意居住在他的这个家乡克尔克，所以我们就在这围绕着它建一个小型的研究所。但在这上面的话呢，我们华为这个创新是围绕着这个让最优秀的人去做研发，最优秀的人去做制造，最优秀的人去做这个服务。所以我想的话呢，由这些的人才，他们能够进得来，能够在华为发挥得好，并且能够留得住。我想这上面的这个机制的话呢，也是我们保证我们有好的输出的一个很重要的方面。
What kind of scientific research are they working on? They gave us a peek into some of their labs.
Wow. This is a soundproof chamber. Those cones are made of like styrofoam. They absorb sound. They reduce echo. What it does is that it allows Huawei to test the frequency around an antenna, make sure that it's optimal for your use, but doesn't interfere with other people's. Now, I'm told that other companies have these chambers, but Huawei's methodology sets it apart because they have networks and facilities in over 100 countries, so they know more about frequencies, about other networks, and that allows them to test the product, go and refine it, and come back and test it again. And they say that gives them a competitive advantage. This is just what they can show us. What about the cutting-edge technology that hasn't hit the market yet? Well, that's top secret, but we did get to meet one of their world-class scientists, Professor Yang Qiang. Professor Yang.
Hey.
Hi, sorry to interrupt. Hi, I'm
Hi,
Linda.
Hi,
Hi,
Linda.
nice
How are
to
you?
meet you.
Nice to meet you.
He leads their research into a universal translator, sort of like Star Trek.
Let me tell you about this great software we are working on. We are working on a software that can translate languages, for example, between Chinese 中国话 and English, and it allows people to be in a meeting face to face, but each side speaking their own languages, and the system can freely translate, especially for people in the technical area. This is a great software because it understands the area and the knowledge behind it.
So it doesn't just translate words, it
Right.
translates meaning.
Exactly. Yeah.
Even jokes?
Even jokes.
Okay, so
Try one.
I'm going to try one. Okay, so why did the chicken cross the road?
That's a great American English joke.
Yeah, to get to the other side.
That's right.
So what would your software do to translate that into Chinese?
Let me see. So to translate it by meaning rather than by syntax, in Chinese, there's also a children's joke that literally says, how do you put an elephant in the fridge? And the answer is, you open the door and then you put it in.
Of course, you have to innovate to improve on what's out there. And Huawei has certainly spent billions on R&D and holds an impressive 49,000 patents. Now, patents don't always equate to innovation. Still, it's one measure, and Huawei is among the top 10 patent filers worldwide. Even with all of their high-tech spending, they're not a household name. So they're now focused on handsets because that's the technology that people recognize as they use their phones every day. So it's not just about the science anymore, it's also about becoming a global brand. And Huawei has quickly climbed to number 3, just after market leaders Samsung and Apple. But to get to the top is not a foregone conclusion for any company. Why is it that it's not a brand at the household level?
I think now Huawei is growing so aggressively, and they also need to calm down and to further strategize their operation, by building more of the global citizenship and local citizenship. So instead of simply push all the way and penetrate into the market and they think their job is done, but their international level is now very high, and they know the global PR, but still, as I would call it, it's a teenager stage.
And growing up is hard to do. For Huawei, it's not just a matter of putting in the cash and getting what they want out the other end. Unlike other companies that seek to move from manufacturer to name brand, Huawei faces some major challenges in the biggest market in the world, the US, and also others like Australia. Huawei has been accused of spying for the Chinese government. Its founder, Ren Zhengfei's stint in the Chinese army has raised concern among American lawmakers who have banned the company from bidding for government contracts.
There's a deep suspicion about Huawei's intentions and Huawei's relationship with the Chinese government that may be based on intelligence, I don't know, but I do know from talking to the security agencies, the law enforcement agencies, that they have a strong distrust of Huawei. It might not be entirely rational, honestly, but they are convinced that Huawei is a tool of the Chinese government, the People's Liberation Army. And until Huawei can figure out some way to overcome that suspicion, they're always going to have trouble in the US.
Huawei says that all of the allegations against them are false. But could suspicions in the world's biggest market cast a shadow over their ambitions? Not according to Huawei's CEO.
今年上半年我们有了19%的增长，当然我还是在美国没有存在。但是的话呢，这个美国的民众是不是能像世界其他地方的民众一样享受华为的这个高质量的产品和服务，那我就不知道。但是对于华为来说的话呢，没有这个市场的话呢，我们仍然取得了一个应该说连续那么多年取得了一个连续不错的一个增长。我相信在未来的话呢，我们还能保持这样的一个趋势。但是什么时候如果这个美国需要我们的产品，那么的话呢，我们也乐意有这个机会为他们服务。但是的话呢，如果这个没有准备好的话，我可以等待。
But do you think it's a little bit unfair?
我没有这个感觉，因为我刚才说过，全世界的人都能够享受华为的产品和服务的时候，如果有一个个别国家的话不能享受我们的产品和服务，我是觉得呢，也许对他们的消费者来说有一点不公平，但是对华为来说并不是那么重要。
The sun is shining in Berlin, and it's to Europe that Huawei is looking for a friendlier reception. Breaking into that competitive market would go a long way toward moving up from third. And that's why Huawei launched their latest handset in style at one of Europe's leading consumer electronics forums, IFA. To be a top global brand, it isn't enough just to have the best technology. Branding is also about desire, aspiration, and a firm's image.
在我们进入到的另外一个连接跟个人和设备和个人、设备和设备的连接里面的话呢，应该说它是不仅仅是需要这些行业的人知道，要让所有的70亿的受众都知道。所以我想的话呢，建立全球的这个在这上面可信任的品牌，对我们促进，特别是我们的这个这个智能手机相关的消费者业务是非常重要的，也只有实现这个，才能实现华为的 mission enrich people's life。
Huawei has done everything it can to become a globally competitive brand. It has invested in research, developed technology, and focused on its presence. It's very close to succeeding. And if it does, it will matter not just for this company, but for China's own transformation.
Back on campus at the end of the workday, it's time to shoot some hoops. For Lin Ye and the other Huawei employees, competing to innovate is what they do every day. It will take more than one company to change an entire country's fortunes. But if they win the big global business game, then it shows that China can produce world-beating companies. And that's the trait that the few countries that have become rich share. It would certainly mark a new stage for Huawei, China, and the rest of the world.
The ban requires all UK telecommunication providers to stop buying new Huawei 5G equipment starting next year, and they must also remove all of Huawei's 5G kit from their networks by the year 2027. This follows US sanctions, which claim the Chinese tech giant poses a national security threat. Huawei did insist it's far from a threat, urging the UK government to reconsider the ban. It called the move politicized, giving in pressure from Washington rather than actual security concerns. Meanwhile, a British spokesman warns the ban could delay the country's 5G rollout by at least a year. Still, Huawei says it will continue working with the UK to build a better connected Britain. Made by the UK in terms of its future with 5G, and also its streamline of industries, particularly telecom industries, in competition against all the other major telecom companies around the world?
I think Huawei is not the sole supplier of 5G networks. Without Huawei, and the UK operators can use the equipment coming from Ericsson and Nokia. And these two parties, and actually it's a duopoly. Without third parties competing, and we know the UK and the European operators will have to pay much higher price without third party to compete into this dual monopoly and situation. However, as Professor Beck says, and the decision is not based on economic or technology merit. It's primarily a political one. So once you make a political decisions, and I don't think the economic impact would be put into consideration, unfortunately. It is extremely costly to replace one vendor's equipment by another vendor. Not to mention, and the services may be disrupted, and etc. Yeah. Usually, you just say, "I stop using your equipment, but I'll keep your equipment in the network for a very long time." Usually, the warranty is 15 years, and usually the operators let the vendor's equipment in the network and until the warranty expires.
On the other hand, Mr. Begg, how should we understand not only this banning Huawei in the UK, but also a series of decisions made by the UK related to how it carves itself about its future, and it carves itself about its relations with the outside world and the structure it wants to deal with the outside world. If I could quote Jim O'Neill, who is the former Treasury Minister under Mr. Cameron, of course, he said this: the impetus to cut ourselves off from China seems to me a bit like weird self-imposed dilemmas that drove Brexit, end of quote. Now, whether you like his comparison or not is one question, but exactly what is the logic now UK is operating in terms of its political decisions, in terms of its geopolitical policies, in terms of its structure to deal with the rest of the world? Many examine it again with this one decision about Huawei.
Leaving the European Union fully by the end of this year, trying to decide where its future lies vis-à-vis other parts of the world, seeking comprehensive trade deals, both with the European Union and all the other range of potential trading partners. And it sees the US as by far the biggest prize economically at the moment, because China runs trade surpluses with most parts of the world. The size of the Chinese market for the UK is relatively small compared with European partners. So if you have to make a choice in this economic war between China and the US, the logic of the position that's being articulated is it's in Britain's self-interest to be allied with the country it trades most with, which is the US, rather than China. It's that hard choice that's the basis for this economic dilemma. And if I may just add a footnote on the Huawei equipment, I heard several telecoms leaders last night saying they were relatively optimistic about the 7-year period. They were relieved to find it was 7 years and not an immediate withdrawal of the equipment. They think that's normal replacement cycle.
There's a lot of political calculations as well as economic articulations, it seems, at least behind the decision. Having said that, though, what about Huawei, Mr. Huang? You're not insider to the Huawei company, I understand, but to you, a tech person looking at the tech company facing difficulties starting from last year's China-US trade war, how is Huawei doing? We know that Huawei just came out with the latest first half year 2020 report, suggesting 13.1% rise in revenue in the first half of the year. But if you take a closer look at the numbers, it is still the growth rate down from 23.2% in the first half of 2019. Of course, first half of 2019, geopolitically speaking, is much safer than what it is today for Huawei. So, but the question really is, Mr. Huang, where is Huawei going? Can Huawei still stand still?
Well, if you look at the report, Huawei comes out and it looks so far so good. But as Huawei's report says, this is their own report. It's not audited at all. We need to wait to see, and the UK is the first, maybe European countries, and to ban the Huawei 5G equipment. We need to wait to see what about the other companies. And as we all know, Huawei's network business, probably over 50% of them coming from overseas. And if Europe as a whole ban Huawei's equipment, then Huawei has a couple of other choices. One is turning to domestically, and another one is to try to sell their equipment to somewhere else and outside China.
Now we know the National Security Advisor and the Deputy National Security Advisor of the United States are both inside Europe, trying to persuade U.S. counterparts in Europe to ban Huawei and to stand from the other side against China, to decouple from China, follow this administration's policy. But Mr. Begg, Professor, from your knowledge about the interesting map of the EU, for example, France, Germany particularly, how will these capitals react? And their reactions to the US call to decouple from China, how will that reflect it to the UK in terms of its own nature of policy making?
But the first thing to say is that Huawei is an extraordinary and innovative company, and there's nothing quite like it in Europe at the moment. That said, the difficulty that all governments are going to face is that there is a concern about over-reliance on China in certain supply chains. This expression I mentioned earlier, strategic autonomy, refers to the fact that you do not want to be overly dependent on a supplier from one source for strategic materials, be it telecoms or more recently the health and other equipment that was being solicited during the worst of the pandemic. So there is a strong move across Europe to increase its independence of major suppliers, and that's going to be reflected in Huawei. Then there is the American pressure. The American pressure is going to be immense.
From a technical perspective, what does that mean for 5G? According to earlier plan, illustrated, articulated by all the telecom companies, tech companies around the world, many of the names we already mentioned in our earlier discussion, we are now almost at the doorstep of 5G, and we are just a few steps away from it. And we're supposed to have a splendid life with driverless cars, with AI, with the Internet of Things, all benefiting from it. And we're going to enjoy our lives. Are we going to be as close to 5G world as we should? Or politics really now is going to delay us from that process?
Well, I think the impact of this geopolitics on 5G is still too early to tell. Because if you look at the 5G suppliers on the telecommunications side of it, Huawei is one of the leaders, but it's not the only one who can supply the 5G equipment. For example, in Korea, 5G network has been put up and in operation by primarily Korean and telecom equipment vendors without Huawei in there. So that says that without Huawei, other telecom equipment vendors can provide 5G network and without Huawei. However, we are in a situation, the global supply chains are intertwined and globally. You can ban Huawei. You can use, for example, Ericsson or Nokia's equipment. But within Ericsson Nokia equipment, some of the components may come from China as well. And if we continue going down this path, we're going to see unfortunate situation is one world, two systems. And then you separate out and the whole supply chain. I think that impact is a lot bigger than just to 5G services globally.
So you're saying, Mr. Huang, that we still do not know whether 5G could be a success if further geopolitics that divide us, particularly having its impact on global supply chain. Is that what you're trying to say? We still do not know whether we can really enjoy 5G anymore.
Well, what I'm trying to say, if this trending or logic continue going down, the impact is not only 5G, will be to other areas. For example, medical side of it. As we all know, lots of chemical, lots of the medical components or supplies also coming from China as well. If you want to ban the whole thing, and the impact is globally. Likewise, lots of things that China also depending on the world. If this and the interdependency has been cut off, the impact is more than just on 5G. It's a globally and also on the global economy.
Professor Begg, before we go, I do want to ask you about one thing. Of course, the UK has to think about its own future as a result of some of the latest decisions, including Brexit. But the UK is also a country that has been enjoying some legendary history if you look at the West as a whole. So this time, what role will the UK play once we could look at things in retrospect, including this decision on Huawei? Will be very interesting, isn't it, Professor Begg?
Very much so. I share Mr. Huang's view that 5G is going to happen. There's no question of that. Business will ensure it happens. It just may be slower and less comprehensive than it might be if there were no frictions arising from the politics. Where the UK goes next is quite uncertain because the draw is from across the Atlantic. What's less clear is how Britain, as a relatively small to middle ranking international power, is going to engage with the rest of the world after full Brexit.
Very interesting. Mr. Huang, with a decision made by the UK regarding Huawei, will there be a domino effect? Or will there be just an exceptional case? That would be a very interesting thing to look, isn't it?
Yes, and absolutely. Another thing is, and one decision has been made. The decision maker have their intended goals to accomplish. History tells very often there were some unexpected consequences may popping up, which is not exactly what the decision maker had in their mind.
Could I add in relation to that a very obvious unexpected consequence is that if you freeze out Huawei from being able to purchase inputs from the US chips, then Huawei is going to develop its own. So you create a new competitor for the US as an unintended consequence of trying to stop the competitor.
Exactly. We already see this is happening in China's semiconductor side of it. You know, Huawei is banned for using US companies' chips. Now the other companies, the Chinese company, everybody is worried and they're wondering who will be the next. So the unexpected consequences, as Professor Beck says, you know, now we see a lot of small startups in the semiconductor side of it. They see this is a booming opportunity for them to fill in the gap, to provide their own chips, selling to Huawei and other Chinese and overseas vendors. This is what I call unexpected consequences.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what will happen next. It's already quite a world of drama every day. Thank you so much, both of you gentlemen, helping us to understand from different perspectives. Professor Ian Begg in London, Jay Huang in Beijing. Really appreciate it, and be well.